Messieurs les
Everyone, I'd like to welcome the directors and each of the members of the military staff here. I'd like to welcome you to our discussions today and welcome to our roundtable discussion talking about the new geostrategical reshuffling in the Levant with, as you can see, a question mark after that, the dismantling of the acts of resistance which was provoked by the determined resistance of Israel and following the terrorist attacks in October 2023, which was commemorated yesterday, the arrival of an Islamist interim government in Syria following the fall of Bashar al-Assad, and then the 12-day war, as it was called, between Israel and Iran, have profoundly altered the strategic equation in the Levant. It's true, but even more recently, and since we published the excerpt you see for this roundtable discussion, the strikes on Doha in September by the Israeli forces, the declaration of New York, which was voted on by 144 countries at the UN, the recognition of the Palestinian state by many different countries, including France, on 22 of September, and even more recently, the announcement of the Trump plan for a ceasefire in Gaza have shifted the lines again and the positions. So who are the dominant players in the region today, and what is their strategy? And will the direct confrontation between Israel and Iran, which was concluded by a ceasefire that was imposed by the White House, that could turn into a war of attrition? Will it turn into a war of attrition? Will Iraq remain stable in this regional maelstrom and in the immediate vicinity? Will Egypt and Jordan bear the brunt of the war between Israel and Hamas? And can the weakening of Hezbollah revive a positive dynamic in Lebanon? And what is the future for the Kurds and the Palestinians? So it's to all these different questions that we're going to try to give a few answers today. Maybe not the truth, but a few answers today. And all of the participants in this roundtable will try to answer these questions today. So if I just think about what was just said in our introductory speeches, this roundtable is kind of an illustration of the firm commitment of we'll have to have in our different theaters that were mentioned by Pascal earlier. So if I look back at the main lines of that Pierre Razoux gave us, which was to think together, accept to talk about difficult subjects, talk more with our heads and with our hearts, and make our brains work, and trying to highlight our skills. And in that respect, I'm very happy to be the moderator for this discussion, together with these recognized specialists. First, Madame Léa Landman. She's a specialist in the Middle East, former director of diplomacy at the EBAN, the Institute for Diplomacy at the University of Aspen Institute. You're also the director at the Reichman University, also at the Eben Institute at the Reichman University. You are director of research, and you are currently sit on the boards of several regional cooperation and research initiatives about the Middle East. I'd also like to welcome Joost Hiltermann, who speaks French, but will be speaking to us in English. You're a special advisor for the Middle East North Africa program at the International Crisis Group. You are director of the MENA program from 2015 to 2025. And previously, you were the executive director of the Arms Division of Human Rights Watch and a research coordinator at the Palestinian Human Rights Organization, Al-Haq, in Ramallah. To my left is the professor Nicola Badaoui. He's a professor at the Institute of Political Science at St. Joseph's University in Beirut. Also a visiting professor at the French universities and a researcher at the CRC at St. Cyr Research Center has been there, that position for several years. I'd also welcome Giovanni Romani, who's the director of Africa and the Middle East at NATO, Chief of Staff in Brussels. And finally, I don't know how to present him, but I looked at Pierre Razoux, who is the director, qualified director of research, and the academic director of the FMES, who has written many books, including one about the Iran-Iraq war, amongst others, which is well known in the circles of the French Ministry of Armies. So I'd like to say very clearly, that's why, because Pierre Razoux asked me to come, and I'd like to thank him warmly to have asked me to come and lead these discussions. But let's more seriously now, why are we here today? As we mentioned, we want to provide some analysis and a few ideas on this subject. So we're going to start our roundtable talking about Gaza, Israel, and Palestine. But maybe that would be a strategic error from my point of view. So I think maybe we should start on a different aspect, and I'd ask all the other participants to talk about more of a regional approach maybe, and talk about the major players in the region first. And to start, I thought it'd be interesting to talk about the actions and the changes and positions and of the posture of the United States vis-a-vis of the Levant, and especially since the return of Donald Trump to the White House. The United States and the chiefs of staff in Israel and in the Gulf states, such as Jordan and Egypt. The question now is, what is the stance of the United States over the past few months and over the past few weeks, and how much faith can we have in the positions of the White House? The long-term objective of Washington to implement a regional safety architecture based on normalized relations between Arab states and the Muslim states, is this actually possible today? Or, on the contrary, can we look at the Abraham Accords and Camp David as something that are viable, or will they be called into question? In any case, this is where the point of departure I'd like for our discussions. And maybe Joost Hiltermann would be the first person to talk about this, based on your experience and in this area. Je vais donc parler en anglais parce que je veux être sûr qu'on capte les nuances de mes paroles. Donc, les États-Unis se retirent progressivement du Proche-Orient depuis 20 ans maintenant. Mais il ne peut pas le faire efficacement. Et donc, ça reste l'acteur principal dans le Proche-Orient aujourd'hui. Et leurs objectifs stratégiques sont de protéger les chaînes pour le pétrole et de garder le prix du pétrole le plus bas possible et de protéger l'Israël. Et ces deux objectifs sont en conflit par moment. Et on le voit même aujourd'hui parce que tant que les États-Unis se retirent de la région ou voudraient se retirer de la région, en réalité, il va laisser une vide où personne d'autre peut prendre sa place, sauf d'autres puissances moyennes qui ont leurs propres ambitions. L'Israël, bien sûr, la Turquie, l'Iran, l'Égypte voudraient se remettre sur la scène comme une pleine puissance, les Émirats arabes unis et l'Arabie saoudite. Tous sont en compétition et les États-Unis doivent jongler tous ces intérêts tout en protégeant ses propres intérêts, qui est très difficile, surtout suite à le 7 octobre 2023 et le déclenchement de guerre en Gaza. Parce que les États-Unis veulent défendre l'Israël et continuent à armer l'Israël. Ils ont dépensé plus d'argent sur les armes pour l'Israël dans les 2 dernières années qu'ils avaient fait auparavant. Et donc, ils sont en train de soutenir les forces en Gaza, qui ont détruit complètement Gaza. Il y a plus de 67 000 qui sont morts, et il y en a encore d'autres qui sont sous les décombres, et plus de 100 000 qui étaient blessés. C'est très difficile de voir comment on va reconstruire cette région dans le proche avenir. Donc, les États-Unis ont couvert les Israël, que ce soit les démocrates et Biden, ou bien Trump et les républicains. Et Trump, c'est un républicain en nom, mais en fait, c'est juste un élément libre, un élément libre. Ce qu'il va faire lundi ou le lendemain, on ne peut pas savoir. On ne peut pas prévoir ce qu'il va faire. Donc, il aime bien taquiner les gens et choisir ses batailles, même avec le Premier ministre Netanyahou, malgré le soutien très fort des États-Unis pour l'Israël. Donc, on ne peut pas savoir ce qu'il va faire. Et c'est bien pour voir, on a voir cette initiative de cessez-le-feu. C'est pas la première cessez-le-feu. Et c'est pas du tout clair si ça va être un succès. Espérons que oui. Mais nous ne savons pas si les États-Unis ont vraiment la volonté d'aller jusqu'au bout de ce cessez-le-feu. Et ce que je prédis...
will have its way in Gaza, on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and also in the region. But one thing that I think we need to look out for, and I'll end with that, is that the situation has changed. The United States had wanted to bring Israel and the Gulf Arab states and maybe other Arab states together through the Abraham Accords. They're still there, and the ambition is still there, but the war in Gaza has made it much more difficult to pull this off. And instead, Israel has become the militarily hegemonic power in the Middle East in the last year. But you cannot rule an area by military power alone. You can only do so through soft power and diplomacy. And it's not clear that diplomacy at the moment is possible, because the Gulf states now are more afraid of Israel than they are of Iran, which is a reversal, of course, in the past year. And so it remains to be seen what Israel can do and how that meshes with the strategic interests of the United States in the region.
Thank you, Colonel. Thank you for your invitation.
Here, but this debate goes beyond also what is within NATO policy. So I will also offer some personal considerations to contribute to this. But let me start by saying that now more than ever, and you were mentioning this, security is global, and there's no such thing as siloed regional security. Security challenges are growing in complexity, and they are interconnected. So we can see Russia using Iran's drones against Ukraine, the Houthis disturbance to global trade, and how the war in Ukraine has affected food and fuel prices in the Middle East and Africa. The fall of the Assad regime in Syria was made easier by Moscow's focus on its war of aggression against Ukraine. And of course, the conflict in Gaza had several effects, like the weakening of Iran proxies in the region, and of course has affected the entire region. So now we have this 20-point Gaza peace plan, and hopefully, as we heard from the previous speaker, this will succeed and will move forward towards a ceasefire. But I would like to highlight also that it is a time where we need leadership, and also we need honest brokers and skilled mediators. And here I would like to highlight, since part of the question is who are the actors in the region, like the role of, for example, Egypt and Qatar, besides, of course, the United States, in mediating and trying to kind of find a solution. And Qatar and Egypt are actually two trusted NATO partners. So it's a domino-like system in which, like the security of Middle East, North Africa, let me also mention the Sahel. It's all part of this, and it's all affected. So and also it's an area of strategic competition in which NATO is one of the actors, but like actors such as Russia and Iran are increasingly positioning themselves, and we heard this also in the introductory panel, as an alternative to the West. And this destabilizes regional security and, in consequence, our own security. So where is NATO in all this? If you read the NATO strategic concept, there are three core tasks. The first one is collective security, but there are two. One is about crisis prevention and management, And the third one is about collective security, about cooperative security. So NATO's goal is to help foster greater security and stability in the region, where we have an expertise, when we could provide an added value in things such as interoperability, defense and security capacity building, and maybe later on we can expand a little bit on what we're doing in Iraq, where we have a mission that advises Iraq's authorities, which we believe is contributing to this. I just wanted to add to the actors in the region which are still relevant. I agree about Israel having become sort of a dominant power from a military perspective lately, but now we need to move towards a diplomatic approach. And sort of the United States cannot detach from the region, and I was talking about leadership. The leadership of President Trump is actually helping in a positive manner. And let me mention also Turkey, which is a NATO member, and together with Qatar could also be representing like a bridge. And Iran and Russia with a lower role because of what happened in recent times. Their influence has weakened, but certainly the Russians are trying to continue having a grip on the region, and they've been supporting the new Syrian leadership, for example, to continue having an influence, but also the Gulf countries. So from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, I already mentioned Qatar, certainly the UAE, and also Oman has positioned itself more and more as a mediator. So I now will stop here. Thank you.
I wanted to talk about how important the Abraham Accords are in the region and talk about the role of the United States. The Middle East is not looking things just based on gas and oil and Israel. I think they've moved beyond that with the Abraham Accords, which is a very clean sign that was given in 1995. It's not just the Oslo Agreement as well. The Arab states, the Gulf monarchies, have a different perspective now. They want to develop their countries, technological development, develop their know-hows, which is much different than it used to be. And it's true that the United States wants to leave the Middle East, but also want to stay, because they want to stay in the Middle East, but in a different way. They want to stay through investments. They want to stay through different military infrastructures that they've set up in the region. And we have to say that this has been done in a very stable way. And what I think is, which is phenomenal the last 2 years, is that the Abraham Accords have held up. The bottom line is they're still there. They're still there, and not only they're still there, but the 20-point agreement that Donald Trump set up, which might be a little bit vague, but actually that has its advantages, which means that maybe people will be able to position themselves. Now, the first thing, it also has made the United States at the center of the deal, but also has added the Palestinian question, made it part of the equation in the region. And that was not even possible in the past. So what's the difference between an optimist and a pessimist, Colonel? What's the difference between an optimist and a pessimist? It's the idea of a glass half full or half empty? No. The pessimist says it couldn't be worse, and the optimist says, yes, it could be worse. Yes, of course it could be worse. But in the immediate future, this 20-point agreement, which a lot of people don't like, and I would say, just speaking generally, the pro-Palestinian camp doesn't like it, but not the camp that is in Gaza. Because yes, it favors Israel. Yes, it says that Hamas has to give up. Yes, it creates a Palestinian state, which is not have a very high role to play. And it also shows that Gaza will be controlled by people from the outside. But that's not what's important, because the main point is the immediacy of the ceasefire. And we will talk later about the domino effect. But in any case, the United States will still have a dominant role in the region, but not in the same way. And I sincerely believe that we talk today as if things were the same as they were 20 years ago. But we're not. Things are different, changed in 20 years. The relationship obviously has changed between Israel and Palestine. There is a complete cleavage we could talk about, which we can talk about later. But I don't want to get away from the subject of Article 8. But I think what happened in October 2023 was a game changer and was a deep rupture in their relationships, and we have to accept that. And the only way we can move forward now is to have a regional guarantee and not just at the local level. Yes, and of course we will talk about that later on. So I understand what you're saying is the United States has no choice but to be a leader in the region, but has to change their point of view and their setup in the region. They have no choice but to remain, but they're going to have to change how they organize their presence. But what we do know is they've given up trying to save the world. But there are a few positive elements that we can take away from the latest developments and from this 20-point plan that was set up, even if it remains imprecise. I'd also like to talk about Iran, which I've already mentioned in the introductory session. Mr. Romani also mentioned Iran. And now the state has been fragilized. It's never been so weak since the Islamic State took over power in 1979. First of all, we can talk about the weakening of its main the main people working with them: Hezbollah, the regime in Syria, and Hamas. So there are three different partners in the region have all been weakened. Also, if we look at the Houthi actions in Yemen, which does show that they still are a major actor in the region, though. And they did have an increasing presence on the international level because they were champions of the Palestinian cause. So first of all, we want to talk about how their allies in the region have been weakened, and also how they've been weakened by the strikes led by Israel. This happened happened last year in the 12-day war, which I already mentioned, so that we can consider that the impressive implementation of the Israeli forces and the impressive strikes that they inflicted on Iran show that they were able to fly right over the capital of Iran, Tehran. That was something just a few months ago we would never even imagine, see Israeli jets flying over Iran. And yet, it has reinforced its relationships in the region, and its relationships and its stature in the regions. It has appeased its relationships with the Gulf countries, which is kind of a paradox if you look at what happened over the past few years. They have attempted a rapprochement with the region, much more so maybe than even Russia or China. So if we put this 12-day war in its context, which was stopped by the United States, we might ask ourselves, could it be resumed? If yes, in what circumstances? And what will be the objectives? Will be a change in regime in Tehran? Is that a credible option over the short term? And is it even an objective? Would a military campaign, could that accelerate a regime change in Iran? And finally, what do you think are the residual capacities of Tehran, even if they have been weakened, to work with their proxies in Lebanon or in Iraq? I'll be talking later about Donald Trump and the U.S. and their role in the Middle East. But it is a paradox, but I think you've clarified the problem. All the different local and regional actors aren't thinking just in ideological terms, but they're thinking in their own interests, actually. Each one wants to save their own skin, you might say. And each one wants to reinforce their own interests, and all the old friendships have now been ripped to shreds. But to answer your question, I think at any time the war between Iran and Israel could be resumed because Iran feels very weak and Israel feels very strong. So the dynamics actual at the time being right now would be like Israel might say now's the time to act, and the Netanyahu's government might say we have to finish what we started. They might say we were stopped in our offensive by Donald Trump in June, but they just wait another pretext. The ideal pretext would be that following the snapback, that the reimposition of sanctions, that the response of the Iranian government would dissolve their agreements in order to make the make a nuclear bomb. But right now, I don't think Iran's going to do that because they're in survival mode. I think they're more in the mode right now is to wait our turn, play the nice guys, and wait until our turn comes up later on. As far as I could understand, I think if we look from the Iranian point of view, the system is preparing, they're preparing now for another offensive by Israel. They have no illusion that at some point or another, Israel will strike them again. They're going to readapt their strategic decision-making process because, for example, if you look at what happened in June, is they were taken by surprise. And because they were taken by surprise, they didn't really know what to do if we look at it objectively. All the authorities that were capable of making decisions, or if they wanted to strike back at Israel, all their forces were eliminated. So I think they've learned a few lessons from this. They've set up a defense council, which for the first time is run by the president of the Pezeshkan, the president of Iran. In fact, to say now that if our guide, who is a bit old and sick, if he can't make the decisions, then someone has to make the decisions. So this new defense council has been set up, and it is placed under the National Security Council, which also has a new role to play, which has been entrusted to Arajani, who is more pragmatic, and he wants at all costs to avoid a second or third wave of confrontation with Israel. And above all, the Iranians have prolonged their system, a system of delegating authority, which goes very far. What I mean is, if even if at the different levels of command, N level command +1 or -5 are eliminated, they've reorganized their decision-making process to make that if someone at any level is taken out, they can still take act. They also keep asking for help from China and Russia. They want jets. They want ground-air missiles. And it would see that Russia has given some MiG-21s, fighter planes. They're not of the latest technology, but it will help them to defend their airspace. It would seem also that they have finally, at long last, at least what the Iranian press is saying and the Russian press is saying, they have agreed on the delivery of the Su-25 later in the decade. They'll also be getting missiles and fighter planes from China. And they also have launched the rearmament program to consolidate and reconstruct their ballistic missile factories and plants, which were destroyed or severely damaged by the strikes by Israel. And Mohsen Ranzaik, the former chief of the base in Iran, said that last week, said in the Iranian press, he's always used, as he's the one who gives the new information. He's the one who says you might, gives us the leaks from the Iranian regime. He says what the regime doesn't want to say outright. And what he said in June was that Iran launched 30% of its long-range ballistic missiles in the month of June. So they still have 70% of their missiles, which is about 1,300 missiles. So he's sending a clear message to Israel and to the U.S. then to say, okay, we are ready to continue. We don't want to continue the fight, but we are ready to fight. So they're trying to win time in whatever way they can and try to overturn this diplomatic balance of power to show the international community and to show all their neighbors in particular and show all the monarchies in the Gulf and IGRAF, those are that we're still here, that we have not been wiped off the map, and that the problem is not longer Iran, and make them people say, we're not the problem. The problem is Israel. And this trend is a really new trend in the region. And the problem on the Israeli side, and I'll let other of our guests talk about that, who'll give us more information about that, is as far as I can see, the government Israeli is in an impasse right now. They're saying, if we bombard Iran again, what will that serve? What purpose will that serve? If we want to destroy their nuclear program completely, if we didn't get that job done in June, we probably won't get it done in our next strike. And in case not without the massive intervention from the United States, and the U.S. doesn't seem to be going in that direction right now. So if it's not the nuclear program, it's regime change. But if it's a regime change, that means it's a whole other campaign we'd have to undertake. And if we go that route, I don't see, as far as I can understand, I don't see what's going to happen. I think the Iranian population would actually support the regime in power, which is a paradox, because before the month of June, a certain part of the Iranian population hated the regime. And now we see that since June, a lot of the population still hates the regime, but now they hate Israel. And that's new. And that has changed the balance in the region.
Yeah, hello. Thank you for the invitation. I agree with my colleague, Mr. Razoux, concerning the weakening, but I'd like to add something because the question is also on Lebanon, because Lebanon and Iraq, Lebanon remains a state, Lebanon as a state, and Hezbollah is a strategic ally for Iran. The consequences of the fall of the regime of Bashar al-Assad in Syria, which was the lever, if I could say so, one of the main levers of the Iranian regime. And this has closed and blocked the transfer corridor of weapons for the Hezbollah, precisely, from Iran throughout Syria. And this, even the budget of Hezbollah throughout, that was coming from, the money coming from probably through Syria. So it took some camps and plans to create those structures of weapons in Syria for Lebanon and the Hezbollah. So I agree with you on the weakening of this Iranian regime from this point of view. However, Russia and China, but China mostly, is trying to not only to help Iran, but to help as well its allies, which remain in the region for Iran. Maybe one of the questions that I raised is on the capacity today of the Iranian regime to be back on its proxies, and we could either continue or stay on the topic of Lebanon and Hezbollah. But there's a question that we're asking vis-à-vis the proxies in Iraq, proxies that have not been activated. And it's in this time of reshuffling of the American presence in that region of the world, it needs to be anticipated and try to be understood. So maybe if you want to say a word on that, and maybe we'll say a few words on Lebanon and Hezbollah. Very quickly, I think that Iran made a strategic mistake in May or June of this year. Their vision was to show to all the proxies that that Iran, that was accused by the proxies to be used, and Iran would sacrifice their proxies to save their interest. And at some point, somebody had to say, "I'm going to war, and I'm the boss." And the strategy was kept by the Iranian regime in June, and this suited well all the proxies because they were all waiting for the boss to show what he could do. And the result is that it didn't really work out, and the Iranian regime is going to have a hard time activating their proxies. We see it in Yemen because the Chinese and the Russians are very active with the Houthis. I won't go all the way to say that they replaced the Iranians, but they're very present on the Houthi side, and they play their Russian or Chinese card to weaken the United States in the region and the Western countries in general. In Syria, it's a major defeat for Iran. There's no more militia in Syria, no more Shiite militia. Lebanon, we'll go back to that in a minute, but they're trying to save what they can save and get rid of the Hezbollah, but they know it's going to be hard to take back the lead and to remotivate the Hezbollah to go back to war against Israel if there were some more strikes between Israel and Iran. Of course, there's Iraq that remains. Iraq is a real subject in itself, and the Iraqi government is also playing on this multi-alignment. We know that the Iranians remain very influential in Baghdad, but the Westerners are here as well, the Chinese, the Russians, the Turks. So everybody's playing at the table. And at the end of the day, I believe that the Iranian regime is going to have a hard time activating their proxies, because in Iraq, they're there not to serve the Iranian interests, but to save Iraq and the regime. With the militias of the popular militias, they are at the Syrian border to prevent ISIS to get back into Syria.
Follow up on that. I think we need to go back to October 2023 to look at the Iranian strategy, because before October, the Iranian strategy was one of forward defense, which was essentially a defensive position vis-à-vis Israel, while also raising the cost to the United States of remaining in the region through harassment in Lebanon or Yemen or Iraq or anywhere where Iranian clients were present. But it was essentially a defensive posture that could be activated by Iran if Iran felt or was attacked by Israel or the United States over its nuclear program. This was the way the system was set up. What happened in October 2023 is that Hamas acted without the consent of Iran, because Hamas was pursuing its own interests over the situation in Gaza. And this is why the Iranian leadership was quite upset at the Hamas leadership in Gaza for having taken this step. And this is why the Hamas leadership in turn, especially the military leaders in Gaza, were quite upset at Iran for not fully supporting Hamas after October 2023. Hezbollah and Iran were involved, but at a sort of half-hearted way, not sincerely. They had to act because their constituents, their followers, were expecting them to do so because they saw what was happening in Gaza and they were standing up in solidarity with the Palestinians in Gaza and with Hamas. So for Hezbollah followers, were expecting the leadership to follow. But the leadership was calculating differently because they saw themselves as in alliance with Iran, where Iran was setting the tone. So this was upset by Hamas. Then that backfired because Israel, after recovering from the psychological shock in October 2023 and fighting back and defeating Hamas, essentially, then saw the opportunity to attack Hezbollah and eventually Iran and to deal a major setback. Destroying the Hezbollah leadership, and certainly in Iran also decapitating some of the military infrastructure, setting back the nuclear program, etc., etc. We're now down to X number of ballistic missiles. I don't know the exact number. But in any case, what has become clear to Iran is that the strategy of forward defense has failed. And I find it very hard to believe that they would start to reinvest in that same strategy when they cannot rely on their clients to act according to Iranian interests. They will always act on their own interests, be it even Hezbollah, which is very close to Iran, and certainly the Houthis, who they do their own thing. And so you cannot rely on your clients to do your bidding. And I think this means that Iran will have to recast its strategy. But right now it's on the defensive, and as Pierre Razoux mentioned, I think it's very likely that Israel will attack again because the opportunity is there, the interest is there, and anything to distract from Gaza is positive to Israel at this stage, so for Netanyahu in particular. So Iran may say it has 1,300 ballistic missiles. Is this a deterrent? Or is that a reason for Israel to attack to make sure that those 1,300 missiles will never be a threat to Israel? So I think the situation is still very much in flux, and we haven't seen the end of violence anytime soon.
You were asking the question on what was to done. It's a huge question in the public debate in Israel. If I consider the attack in Doha, the point of the attack that failed, actually, the point was to send a strong message that the red lines are not existing anymore. Even if Israel does not have a particular purpose in Iran, and you're very determined on the idea that Israel is going to attack Iran, I think it's likely. I'm not sure this is in the interest of the monarchies of the United States right now. So I'm waiting to see how this is all going to play out. And I would like to say as well, which may seem a bit paradoxical, another round of war between Israel and Iran is not going to destabilize the region. It's not going to be pleasant, but it's not going to destabilize the region. If I look at the first attack, the attack of June, nobody came to save Iran, nor the big powers, the middle-sized powers, the proxies. Nobody came to their rescue. So I'm sure that is one of the questions that Iran is asking themselves right now. I have an idea on what we call the 12 Days War, which sounds very well. It's a very good title. It reminds us of the 6-day war. We started one day, it ended on the 12th. It's very easy to remember. And I'm not going to go back 40 years in time because we won't have time, but taking this October 7th as the reference date, even the 13th of April as the second date, because it's the first time there's an open conflict between Israel and Iran. It's really the first time, so we need to look at that as a continuity. Are there going to be some other rounds? Most likely. I'm not sure that there'll be a precise purpose to that. Is it to prevent the Iran to put back their air defense systems? Maybe. A quick comment here. Israel attacked the Hezbollah? No. I disagree. On October 8th, Hezbollah started to shoot on Israel. And what was very interesting is that Hamas was expecting a much stronger reaction. And what Hezbollah did is continue to play. I don't want to underestimate them when I say that, but they continued playing within the borders, the boundaries was admissible, possible between Iran and the Hezbollah. We sent a few missiles, but there was a miscalculation on the part of the Hezbollah because 80,000 people were evacuated from the north of Israel, and they could not live there. So there was a big debate in the Israeli chief of staff. Do we attack the Hezbollah on the 8th or the 10th of October, or do we wait until we stabilize the Gaza Strip? As you all know, the decision was to wait with all the impacts that it had. But there was 60,000 people that were displaced in the south of Israel, which made it inhabitable. So the Hezbollah managed, in a way, to open a second front in Israel, and it's first time that 60,000 people are evacuated from one place in Israel. So let's not underestimate them. But it's the Hezbollah that started the attack on October 8th. Thank you very much.
This will like this is an opportunity actually for me to expand a little bit on Iran, because we actually, NATO, we're watching 5 aspects of Iran. The first one is, of course, the internal dynamics and the suffering of the people that are under a very repressive regime. But the other 4 aspects are international. So the first one is their ambition to go nuclear. NATO is not like a NATO or JCPOA, so we talked about the snapback, but certainly we are concerned about this, including the danger for proliferation, of course, in case this happens. There are other actors in the region that will probably look into going nuclear as well. So the second aspect is the ballistic missile threat, and we just heard about them still having a very strong capacity. They used it recently, and this for us is certainly something that requires a lot of attention from NATO. Then the support to Russia. Actually, it was a way for both countries to kind of break relative isolation. I would say that this isolation is possibly no longer there. I also want to remind you that in Iran, there are actually a number of embassies, a number of NATO countries that have diplomatic relations with Tehran. But still, it's this like a collaboration between Russia and Iran, and also from a military perspective, versus war against Ukraine, is an aspect that has alarmed a lot the allies. And the last aspect is what I would call kind of the offset strategy that some of colleagues were talking about, like the proxies. Now, I believe Iran has demonstrated with the recent developments that has been unable to protect the proxies and to support them somehow. So this certainly is a blow in this offset strategy, but it doesn't mean that they cannot be, to some extent, reactivated and still be dangerous. Certainly what has happened is that with the fall of the Assad regime, this connection between Iran and Lebanon through Iraq and Syria is now broken. So this offers opportunities for a number of countries to actually move in a different direction now. And I would like to acknowledge also the suffering of so many people of the last few years, besides Gaza and also Israel, but the Syrians, the Yemenis, the Sudanese, the Lebanese. So, and I would say particularly for Lebanon, Syria, there's actually a golden opportunity now that is offered to them to actually put their countries back on track, back on their feet, and they will need internally to get things right. They will need a strong leadership, and they will need support from the international community as well. Particularly in Lebanon, I'm sure you will mention this, but the Hezbollah weakening has actually created a power vacuum that needs to be filled immediately by positive forces. That's why the Lebanese armed forces need to be supported, and an effective governance system need to be put in place, because the country has been suffering for too many years from let me call it mismanagement with an euphemism. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. To stay on Lebanon, and maybe a question, a very direct question. The hostilities have stopped, but the situation remains less from being solved. The country seems at a turning point, historic turning point, that shows in what you just said. In Beirut, the political authorities and military authorities that were named this year, they have recently unveiled a very ambitious plan to disarm the Hezbollah and other armed force groups. It's an opportunity for the country to recover its sovereignty on the use of weapons and the use of strengths. But this disarmament plan appears as well as a risk to reactivate the community, the tensions within the communities, or return to civil war. And the region needs an appeased Lebanon and reconstructed Lebanon. This stability remaining a major stake, do you think that the reforms that are expected, and particularly the reforms that are not for in terms of security, but are more impacting economy and finance, you think those reforms can be undertaken? And for this disarmament plan in particular, do you think it can be conducted to the end? There's some phasing of it. I think the first phase is being implemented as we speak. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about it? Mr. Badaoui. Yes, we need to go back a few years to know that Lebanon was under an embargo that was not declared. Why? Because we had the Caesar law on Syria, and Lebanon was, if I could say, between those sanctions, that were imposed most likely on Syria, but they were also imposed on Lebanon. Why? Because all the funding from the Bank of Lebanon, and that would give all the supply, if I could say so, in terms of support to the state. Everything was bought by Syria in those days because they didn't have the raw materials that they should have, and they took everything with a subsidy of the Bank of Lebanon. And there was this economic crisis, acute economic crisis, and for the first time in the history, a banking system that was a model had fell because of the sanctions. That's number one. Regarding the Syrian migration that started in 2011 with a civil war in Syria, and that created a complete disruption, economic disruption and military disruption, because Iran welcomed a lot of refugees in the world. 1.5 million of Syrian people migrated massively. It has a huge impact, social impact on the country. So that's the second point. Today, the question that you asked me, Colonel, on the decision of the government, Lebanese government, the new Lebanese government, with the president of the republic, which was elected recently, currently, for the first time, there's a national security strategy that was implemented, and this is a first in Lebanon. We also have a defense strategy within this national security strategy. That's number one. Regarding the application of the decision of the Lebanese government to disarm Hezbollah and Palestinian groups on the Lebanese territory, this will probably be a question brought along the Task Force 7, which is chaired by the General Seller with France, most likely, and the United States of America. And that are what we call the mechanism, and which is supervising and the question of ammunition deposited by the Hezbollah that are going to be seized by the Lebanese army. And the Lebanese army here is an army that is quite robust, and they have some equipment. They lack sometimes the equipment, but they remain nonetheless very strong. And the Lebanese army is quite present in order to establish the safety in the country. So this is. And yesterday the day before yesterday, we had a report on by the chief of staff for the government, Lebanese government, and it also included the plan for the army, and there were some practical details on that were presented during the last meeting of the government. So this is on disarmament. However, the funding of Hezbollah for these militants, Hezbollah is still funding its militants, those who lost their houses, their buildings, and they pay up till this day for those who are homeless. And another question that comes up is most likely the fall of the Bashar al-Assad regime. It means that there's no more transfer of arms from Syria to Lebanon. So the last point that I want to raise is that there's the implementation of the resolutions 1559 and 1701 of the Security Council that need to be executed in Lebanon.
Just to add a few points about what you were just talking about. I don't think that the risk is of a weakened Hezbollah, which understands that Iran will no longer be supporting it. And they might actually say, instead of being the kingmaker, the Hezbollah becomes the troublemaker. If we look at the history in Lebanon, there have already been political assassinations, for example. So I think the risk today, maybe not today, but tomorrow or in the near future, is that if Hezbollah reaches the conclusion that in order for us to exist and to have play a social and political role in our country with respect to the Shiite community, then we might see more assassinations, such as of the president or the prime minister, in order to put in place another chaotic situation in which Hezbollah knows that it will exist, even if they know very well that they will not be the kingpin or the top player in the region. But again, they will then become remain a leader of the Shiites. What do you think about that idea? As I said, I think that the Lebanese army, because it's the army that is responsible for security of the president and of the heads of the government. So no one, of course, can guarantee their security, but I believe that the strategy that was implemented concerning the safety or security of the country, and not just the security or safety of the president or the heads of the government, that everything is possible in these scenarios. But as I said, I think the safety is supplied by the army. I would also want to add something because you did mention about the Shiite duo that remains on the scene in Lebanon. As you know, there are the parliamentary elections, which will be held in a few months' time. The question of these parliamentary elections, have been said that Hezbollah might not want these elections to take place because, for them, the elections that have taken place in the past, and in particular, the elections with Lebanese expatriates who don't live in Lebanon, and there's more than 10 million of them, or 10 to 15 million people who live in North America, Europe, or South America, and who did not vote for Hezbollah and its allies. So this question of the elections, I believe that for Hezbollah, for example, if you can only vote for 6 deputies with the new law, and the expatriates cannot vote for 128 deputies, this question itself, which, if it's introduced, could create a great deal of uncertainty. Because they certainly don't want to change, I would say. And they want that these expatriates can only vote for the 6 deputies.
One thing on the Israeli strategy. So first of all, there was a misunderstanding, because when I was saying that Israel attacked Hezbollah, I was talking about September 2024. Yes, the beepers, and then the decapitation of the Hezbollah leadership. Of course, Hezbollah attacked Israel in October 2023. And of course, the displacement in Israel was unprecedented. Of course, there was a similar displacement in southern Lebanon. And that was not unprecedented. That had happened on several occasions because of the ongoing conflict. But the thing about the Hezbollah attack in October 2023 was that it was half-hearted. It wasn't a full-scale attack on Israel. And so Hezbollah ended up exposing itself and made itself vulnerable to the counterattack that happened a year later, that ended up destroying Hezbollah, essentially. But the question I have is, what is the strategy for Israel now with regard to Iran? Because if it's going to attack Iran again, as it well may do, is it to do what, is it for regime change, which has been mentioned, or is it to do what Israel calls mowing the lawn, which it has done in Gaza for so long with Hamas? The mowing the lawn strategy in Gaza clearly also failed. It didn't work because you saw what happened on October 7th, 2023. But regime change is a very dangerous undertaking. The United States deploying 200,000 troops in Iraq in 2003 failed to stabilize Iraq. Israel doesn't have ground troops to deploy in Iran. It can destroy the leadership, probably. It has shown it can. It has the intelligence capability, the military capability. It could do it, but what would be the result be? It would be a destabilized Iran. It wouldn't be a neat takeover by some other group. Which other group? And therefore, the question is, what does Israel really expect from and want in the region? It's undermining the Syrian government right now, despite Trump's support for the new president. It is keeping Lebanon off balance. And it's frightening the Gulf states with which it has these Abraham Accords, or would like to have Abraham Accords. I don't understand where this is going, and I'm just really worried that it's not going in a very good way at all.
Je peux ajouter un point aussi. Je crois que la question...
I think that if we talk about another point in the region that we have to keep mention is that it's not only oil and gas now that decides the game. It's also water. Water is a strategic question in the region, and the question of water concerns Lebanon, concerns Syria as well, also concerns Israel. It's in this zone what we call, it's a hydro-conflicted area, as they call it, which also exists between Syria, Turkey, and Iraq. And also there's another zone, which we talk about today as well, which is about the dams that they want to do, the Renaissance dams. So I think the question that you bring up is very interesting. But I don't think we have enough time to talk about it with the time that's left. Maybe we can talk about it later, though. There are two subjects that I'd like to talk about. One that we started to talk about earlier, which was the renewal of Syria. In 2025 represents the first year of the new Syrian regime. We know exactly, maybe not exactly as we would like, maybe not in a world that the way it's likely to be, but the world is what it is, and we have to deal with that. And if we talk about the President Assalaha, who talked at the UN in New York recently, and that represented really the renewal of Syria in the past few years, over the past year. We know that it's a very fragile peace right now in the country. The fall of the al-Bashar regime and the dramatic events of the past few months have also contributed in Syria to put Syria back on the scene. The question of the Druze Alawite minorities and Kurds, of course, the Kurd minority, this question has become important again. Both the vulnerability of these minorities and also the possible instrumentalization of these minorities. And I think these are going to be subjects and problems that we'll have to deal with more in the future. It's a central problem that we need to talk about, not just in just for the geopolitical or geographic problem, but also we're talking about this reshuffling that we've been talking about in the region. So what do you think? What is your analysis? And this comes back to NATO as well. What is your analysis of these increasing tensions, increasing tensions between Turkey and Israel in terms of Syria? What are the chances to actually reach, in your opinion, agreements between Damascus and the different minorities that I just mentioned? And what are the risks that we will witness a shattering of more fragmented reshuffling in the region, creating increased instability between the minorities and in the Levant in general? I'm not sure who would like to answer the question. since 2011, Syria is kind of what we might call the echo chamber of all the regional interests. And it's true that it changes over time, but it's still a country where all the different powers are involved, world powers and regional powers. And I'll just talk quickly about the minorities in the region. When the Syrian forces started to massacre the Druzes in the south of Syria, the religious leader of the Druzes, there's 150,000 Druze in Israel, in Syria. There's also Druze in Israel, in the Likud. And he went to talk to Netanyahu. He said, you're going to not let the Druze get massacred in Syria. So we also have to understand that the Druze in Syria, who have family in Israel as well, they also have political power, which has increased now. They have a political power. That's not because they're demonstrating or protesting in the streets, but they also have a direct line to Netanyahu. And the reaction did take place, and it was not just because of these links between the Druze in Syria and Israel, but that was important. But it's not just the Druze, it's also the Kurds, the Christians, and Alawi, who are also talking again about everything they've lived over the past 40 years, and who are minorities and who are not protected. So we're going to give the new Assala, the new president of Syria, his chance. Plus, you can't choose who you have contacts with. You have to take who comes and try to do the best you can with them. But the reaction we've seen from Al-Shara are very interesting, actually. I think there is an opportunity right now that we have to take advantage of, that there will be a defense agreement that will be concluded between Syria and Israel. That would be very important because between Syria and Israel, there's really no ideology, as you mentioned earlier, that separates it. They really are just working on their own interests. We know that the head of the think tank in Dubai who talks about it, we talk about everyone is now looking at their own interests. There's the IMEC corridor, for example. We're not talking about ideology anymore like we used to. And also something else important in Syria is the role of Turkey and the place that Turkey wants to take in Syria. They want to have an increasing role in Syria. And we've been talking about that for a while now. And if we look at the place of Turkey in Syria now, which was also an important role in getting rid of al-Assad, because there were different military arrangements in Syria as well. Because remember, there's no official arrangements between Turkey and Israel except in Syria. They are forced to talk at the same table about Israel. And if we look at the map on Syria, I'll just finish up with this point, whether it's in Middle East or in Africa, it's interesting to see in 2024 and 25, there have been agreements with Somalia, for example, on military bases, a defense agreement, and export agreements. Same with Libya. So Turkey is starting to set up a corridor, a crescent of influence, which might replace Iran. And we'll see if they do replace Iran, because Iran has been isolated both in the world and in the Middle East. So we see the balance of power is changing. And when things go bad with Turkey, and that will happen, in my opinion, when there are problems with Turkey, it'll be interesting the response of Europe and the United States. In any case, what we see in Syria is an ecosystem, a reduced ecosystem of all the different tensions in the Middle East. Thank you, Léa. I'm a little bit more optimistic. You who know me, you'll probably have a smile on your faces, but I think, first of all, Israel has other things to do right now. They have other priorities. Even Turkey and Syria now is not their priority. And even more, and that was the second point I would make, it's because Erdogan has also other priorities right now. He has what he wants is in Syria, I would say. He's got a regime that is favorable to him, even if the regime is, even if al-Shara is aligning with other powers as well. It is kind of playing the field right now to see what he can get. But in general, I would say that Erdogan is more or less happy with his relationship with Turkey, with Syria. Plus, as you said, if we talk about this buffer zone they've set up in Syria, Turkey has that. They are able to protect their own country from the Kurds, the Syrian Kurds. They're also recognized as a major actor in the international level now, at least in the Middle East. So I think the priorities of Erdogan are more the corridor in the Caucasus, towards Central Asia. It's also Africa as well. It's also to contain Iran and Russia, with who he has not necessarily done some things that they agreed with. He didn't help them, for example, to save Syria. And also, if we look at the corridor he set up an agreement with Donald Trump. So he has also done things which the Russians aren't very happy with, and Iran as well. So we can see that Erdogan has also helped out a little bit in Ukraine to arm Ukraine. So we can see that the Russians aren't too happy with the attitude of Erdogan, and the Iranians even less. So Donald Trump, they need the guarantee of Trump, and it's kind of a paradox with NATO. Turkey has become an ally of the United States. So confronting Israel in Syria, I really don't think that's a priority for Turkey right now. Thank you, Monsieur Razoux. It might not be a priority, but there is still a probability of problems and a flare-up in tensions, which is why I think in communication, again, is important. Another thing I didn't talk about earlier, which is something we all have in mind, I think, is that something we need to think about when we talk about Syria is the risk of the resurgence of terrorism as well. That's something we should keep in mind as well. And the last point we might want to talk about is, in my opinion at least, and I think it kind of joins what you were saying earlier. The subject was very broad today, and at the end, we get down to more specific things: Gaza, Palestine, and Israel. The current regional environment we've seen has been reshuffled recently. There's a lot of the military demonstrations we've seen and the tactics of Israel have undeniably reshuffled the region. It was unprecedented in its violence and in the strikes we saw. And at the same time, and this is something you said in introduction, it has also reemerged the question of the Palestinian state. Since 7 October, in my analysis, the leaders in Israel have rethought the safety of their country since October 7th, the way that they need to think about their own safety, and why their strategy has changed. And even for us, it's even hard for us to understand what is the final objectives of Israel and how they define what actions they should take. Long-term strikes or over the long and short term. And objectively, they are also being condemned nationally. They've been isolated on the diplomatic level, and they have now confined themselves, and you know this better than I, with internal tensions as well in Israel between the civilians and the militaries. Even if there is still a link between the reserves and the active standing army, there are tensions. And this still continues even 2 years after they've started their military operations in Gaza. So they still have questions. So I'm wondering, what are the plans that they will be following? Do they have a long-term, like a more fine-grained plan? Is it something they prepared? Or is it just more like a domino effect? I move forward, things happen, and based on what happens, I'll keep moving forward. What are the final objectives? Where can they, or when is it possible, or where do they want to go? And this is what the questions you were brought up earlier. And to summarize, if we look at the region today, if we look at October 8th, 2025, are things more chaotic now than they were on the 6th of October, 2023? Or on the contrary, has Israel, due to its unbridled military action, has it become a new factor of instability on a regional level? And this question, I think, is, if we look at all the questions we've brought up, I think this is the question that researchers have really taken an interest in, military leaders as well. That's the question that I think the people in the room here would like to have the clearest response as possible. I know it's a very vast question, and I'm not sure who would try to answer it first.
Politics, and I'm not an expert on Israeli politics, is that it's all tactical. There is no strategy, there is no vision, and there hasn't been in a long time. And Benjamin Netanyahu in particular is a brilliant tactician. He knows how to stay in power, and he knows how to stay out of the courtroom. And that is what drives him. And so he will take any step in order to ensure these two things. And that means you cannot have a strategy, because beyond that, you cannot have a strategy for the region, for Israel's role in the region. I think for Netanyahu, what was important even 2 years ago or 4 years ago, signing the Abraham Accords, is no longer important to him. The Abraham Accords have lost in value to Israel. I'm sure there's no consensus on that. But it's clear that at this point, for Netanyahu, he sees the opportunity to defeat enemies, and so he's taking advantage of that. Plus, that is a way of staying in power, because you know that he was blamed for all the mistakes that allowed October 2023 to happen. But he's never been held to account for that, because there was always the argument, this can only happen after the war. Well, if you say that, then you have an interest in perpetuating the war. And this is what he has done, again, also because he is facing corruption charges in court. And so the current situation is the best possible way forward for him. He would like to avoid an election if he can. He certainly would like to win one if there is another one. But he has to juggle between the far right, between Mr. Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and others on his far right, and those on the center right, because there is no more left in Israel other than individuals in civil society, but not politically in any meaningful way, certainly not on the Palestinian issue. And so this is what we have today. We just have actions followed by actions. Maybe it's a domino effect, as you suggested. And of course, it is a reaction to what is happening in Washington. And somehow Netanyahu has to negotiate the situation or navigate the situation depending on what Trump does from one day to the next. And he tries to influence Trump, and I think he's quite successful in it. But then Trump will, because Trump is Trump and he is a narcissist and he wants to be the one in charge of everything and to get the Nobel Peace Prize. This is being announced on Friday, so we'll find out very soon that he won't get it. But in any case, and then we wonder what the result will be. He will be very upset. In any case, he will take actions that then look like they are contrary to what Netanyahu wants. But Netanyahu is a political survivor. He is not immortal, so there will be an end to all of this at some point. But until then, I am quite convinced that he will continue this masterly game of tactics that he has pursued for the last 2 decades.
Je vais essayer de faire un exercice un peu difficile. Essayer de ne pas rentrer sur la responsabilité de chacun. Parce que
I'm going to try to make this as clear as possible and talk about what's going on in Israel now. And if you look right now what's going on in Israel, there's thousands of protesters in the streets in Israel for a couple of years. I'm not going to talk about that now, though. I think there absolutely was a domino effect since October 2023. Hamas attacks, Hezbollah attacks. Israel destroys Hezbollah. The Hezbollah forces in Syria had to concentrate on Lebanon. They left Syria. They had to go back to Lebanon. That helped Turkey to advance their pawns in Syria and get rid of al-Assad. And I don't think we're seeing not defense strategy, more an attack strategy now in Iran. The Iranian attack in April enabled Israel to destroy the air defense of Iran, and then Iran could attack again following the attack in Israel. So it really was a domino effect. Was it planned? Probably not. But was each operation planned in advance? Absolutely. Because those beepers, it was 20 years they've been working on it. All the plans, even Iran, they had planned that for years and years. So maybe it was a domino effect, but there were circumstances that happened in the region that enabled all the different actors, or each base where these forces were localized against Israel, they fell. And now it is much more chaotic than it was before. There are a lot more actors involved now, which have, because of all these different actors, the region has been destabilized. Things look harder now, harsher, more, but maybe less chaotic, because the actors who are left, maybe they will be able to establish a more tactical or geopolitical structure. Now there are still all the proxies, there's still all these different relays, all these militia are still there, but we see that certain of the militias that were in place, who were causing a lot of disturbance, have been destroyed. Israel has decided within this space, and with what have they decided? Netanyahu have the support of the left and right. They've decided that this red line, the Israeli red line, there is no red line. That any threat to us, we will attack it. But there is a left, an Israeli left, which is Ergolan, and we have to understand the trauma of Israel after October 7th. We can't forget that. And if you push that aside, you will never understand what's happening in Israel. Now, as we said, it's not the left has to adapt, but Europe has to adapt as well to what's happening. As we said earlier, you can't choose, you have to deal with. We did not decide who is in power. And we can't be afraid of disruption. There is a disruption in the Middle East right now, but in reality, it happens every few years. But now we get the feeling that it's a little bit harsher than it was in the past. There's a European kind of fantasy. I don't want to say Western, because it's really European. We try to talk about what's fair and not fair and what is just and what is true. But is that adapted to the current situation? I'm not convinced. We can say, though, if we look at if a peace initiative, or if we look for a roadmap moving towards peace, that is not fair for the Palestinians. And it's true. This roadmap is set up is not fair for Palestine. But at the same time, there has never been a Palestinian state. And this is the first time in 25 years that there is enough countries and enough things at stake that there will be a Palestinian state. Now, the priority is to stop the war and to release the hostages and to get Israel out of Gaza. It's true that the Palestinian Authority still has 1,000 steps to go through before they will able to obtain a state. But we've never asked the Palestinian Authority to assume their responsibilities, and this is the first time we have asked them to assume their responsibilities. Now, I shouldn't say it's the first time I've heard this, but this is the first time I've heard this is actually going to be the basis to actually make progress towards a Palestinian state. So again, we shouldn't be afraid of disruption. This might be something that's interrupted a process that's been in place for a long time and had not made progress. Thank you. So I'd like to thank all of the panelists and all the speakers. I think we may have a few questions from discussions with you, with the audience. If anyone has any questions, you can either try with the QR code, and we're going to try to stay connected. I'm not really sure how it works, or even if we can pass a microphone around. You can see the screen behind you. So the first question, what is the actual will of the Gulf states with respect to Israel? What do the Gulf states want from Israel? But if we're going to talk about, we do have a roundtable about the Gulf states coming up, so we're not going to talk about that one. Well, number two, can we consider the example of Levant as another example of a withdrawal of European influence, which has been taken up by other actors in the region? Have we seen a... Oh, you want me to read all the questions? The role of the post-Assad Syria in the region, what could be their role in the region? Will they be aligned more with Israel or with Iran? What is the source? Where did you get the map that you showed earlier on the screen? Does France have an international role to play in the Middle East? What is the role of the Israeli people faced with the decisions of their government? I think there's a few things we could mention. You can maybe go back to the introductory session we had, where we talked about the main lines of the interests, the main interests, I think, in the region were talked about in the introductory session. After, we have to be realistic and pragmatic, but at the same time, there are certain principles that we should not abandon, even if we have to remain pragmatic and realistic. So I'll let the other people mention that. That map was made by FMES with Pascal Orsic, who our map maker, who is right here. So thank you for the applause for him. If we look at the role of Syria post-Assad, I'm not certain that we could talk about the subject. We've had enough time to talk about that since it's very new. But maybe we should talk about what we don't want Syria to be post-Assad. And I think we would all agree in certain respects on that. We talk about it. We are working together with HTC and the representatives from the group HTC. There is a process that has been implemented. We have reached an international consensus to reconstruct the Syria, to rebuild. And I think this is something you've seen, that we've removed certain sanctions because the security and the stability in Syria will first of all be economic. If we don't stabilize the economic aspects in Syria, it will be impossible to rebuild the country. Also, an ideal world in which we'd like to work, if everything is going great in Syria and it becomes, and if we can visit the mosque in Damascus and people can come and visit the country freely, then we'll have made a lot of progress. Looking at the Levant and the fact that the role of France has decreased, we would say that this has gone back over the last 2 decades. It's a very difficult and complex region for France, especially in Lebanon, which is the incarnation of this complexity in the way the country is set up even. Yes, we could say that what's happening in the Levant represents the decreasing role of France in the region, but I don't think it's more so than in other theaters and other regions. If we talk about what is Israel striving to achieve, and I think if we talk about it openly, there is a paradox in the region right now. If we talk about the Gulf countries, I think there's a great divergence between the long-term plans of the Gulf states. If they look at the future of their countries, they're looking more at the development of their own countries. And the development of their cultures can only happen if they have peaceful relationships with their neighbors. We've seen that they've made overtures towards Tehran in recent years. It's something they've been building already over the past few years. Again, we come back to the Abraham Accords. There is a lot of uncertainty and a lot of fragility, and yet we should keep in mind that if we talk about the Gulf, the powers in the Gulf, their idea clearly is, whether it's the 2030 vision that they developed, and beyond that, they're really keyed in on development. Now, if we talk about the actual populations of the countries, if we talk about the roundtable have about the youth, we think the young people, they have their role to play, and it's fundamental. And we are in countries, in fact, in which they have made that the youth we have to update our vision of the young people in those countries. Things have changed over the last 20 years, and this is something that we have to talk about. I would also talk about the photo, that excellent photo that we saw in Shanghai, that we saw earlier. Obviously, that goes beyond the subject we've been talking about, because we've been talking about the Levant. But if we talk about the BRICS countries and the influence they have in the Levant, if I look at the global picture now, at least in the Gulf countries, if we look at certain aspects in certain areas, these are going to be powerful actors in the region, whereas in other areas, they don't have their card to play. It really depends on what area we're talking about. And I'm not sure if I answered the question, but I think they have the role to play in certain areas and in certain countries. But I'm not sure if I answered, but I'm still available if I want to answer any questions. I just want to go back to Palestine and Gaza. And if I want to answer as a historian, I would say that unfortunately, the Palestinian question is kind of like everyone has their role to play. Everyone likes to be interested, takes interest, but everyone would rather have their, it's kind of like a hot potato. We all have it in our hands, but we'd like to pass it on to our neighbor and have them take care of the problem.
Eh bien, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. So I wish you a good, fruitful day and a very fruitful day and a good seminar to follow.